She spilled her entire coffee on a stranger on a Saturday morning, called him nobody special, and walked away. Monday morning, she walked into her new job, and he was already at the head of the table. He never mentioned the cafe. She couldn't tell if he'd forgotten her or if he was waiting to see what she'd do next. Turns out he kept the napkin the whole time. The coffee was already tilting before Maeve Calloway made it out the door. She knew this. She could feel the physics of it, the cardboard sleeve shifting, the lid not quite seated right, the thermal law of hot liquid looking for any excuse to become a problem. And she adjusted her grip, shifted her bag higher on her shoulder, and then immediately forgot all of that because her phone buzzed, and it was her sister. And the text said, "Did you remember the onboarding packet?" And the answer was obviously no. She had not remembered the onboarding packet. The onboarding packet was sitting on her kitchen counter, next to a half-eaten piece of toast, and a very judgmental succulent named Gerald. "Okay," she said out loud to no one. "Okay, it's fine, it's digital, I can forward it, I can... Where is the email? Why does my phone have 17,000 unread emails? That's not normal, that's a cry for help." She pushed through the glass door of Café Grind and directly into a wall. Except the wall exhaled. The coffee went first, a long catastrophic arc of oat milk latte, the kind that cost £4.50, and took the barista 2 minutes of artistic foam work, and it landed across the front of a very white, very pressed, very expensive-looking shirt in a pattern that could generously be described as modern art. Maeve froze. The man, the extremely solid human being she had just fully irrigated, did not move, did not flinch, did not make a sound. He simply stood there, coffee dripping from the line of his collar, and looked at her with an expression so completely, deliberately neutral that it crossed from calm into something almost architectural. Oh my God. She grabbed a fistful of napkins from the condiment station she was somehow already standing next to. How? And made contact with his chest before the social calculus of that caught up with her. She stopped. The napkins hovered. Sorry, I just... reflexive. I'm a dabber. I dab at things. I don't know why." She looked up. He was looking down at her with the same expression. Is it hot? It was hot 2 minutes ago, but I think the walk cooled it down, or at least I hope so, because otherwise this is significantly worse, and I'm already at about a 7 out of 10 on the catastrophe scale for a Saturday morning, so... He said nothing. She processed this. Most people said it's fine by now, or don't worry about it, or even just it's okay. 2 words, minimal effort, the verbal equivalent of a social exit ramp. This man did not take the exit ramp. He simply continued to exist in front of her, coffee-soaked, unreadable, patient in a way that felt almost clinical. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning," she said. "Obviously, I don't have a card on me right now. I left my wallet in my other bag, which is the bag I should have brought today but didn't, because I thought this bag had more room and it doesn't. It has less room. That was an error in judgment." She stopped herself, inhaled. "I'm going to write my number on this napkin and you can text me the bill. It's fine. This is recoverable." She produced a pen from somewhere inside her coat. She always had a pen, this was the one reliable thing about her, and wrote her number on the least coffee-stained napkin she could find. She held it out. He looked at it. He looked at her. "So you're very calm about this," she said, which is either really mature or actually concerning, I can't tell which. She tilted her head. He was tall, not aggressively tall, just present. The kind of tall that meant she was looking up at him in a way that made her feel like she was making a report. She studied his face for some clue of what was happening behind it, and found nothing she could read. "You don't look like anyone I know," she said, which was not what she meant to say. I don't know you, obviously. You're, nobody special." The words were out before the filter engaged. They always were. She winced. "That came out wrong. I meant..." "I know what you meant," he said. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice was low, unhurried, and completely unperturbed. The voice of a man who had at some point decided that urgency was optional. He took the napkin from her fingers, glanced at the number, and folded it once with the neat, economical precision of someone who folded things correctly on the first try every time. Maeve blinked. "Okay," she said. "Okay, great, good talk." She retrieved the pen, clicked it, dropped it, picked it up again, and stepped back toward the door. "I'm sorry about your shirt. It was a really nice shirt. Probably, I assume. Goodbye." She left. The door closed behind her. Through the glass she did not look back, because looking back was the thing you did when you wanted to know if a situation was worse than you thought, and she had made a policy decision about not doing that anymore. Forward motion. That was the thing. She had an onboarding packet to find, a new job to not be late for on Monday, and a very full morning of pretending that the last 4 minutes had not happened. Inside Café Grind, Elliot Voss stood very still and looked at the door she'd just walked through. The corner of his mouth had done something. It was not a smile. He was not prepared to call it a smile, but it was the precondition for one, the brief involuntary twitch of facial muscles that meant something had reached him that he hadn't been expecting. He noticed it, the way he noticed everything, precisely without commentary, filing it somewhere without a label. Nobody special. He looked down at his shirt. He looked at the folded napkin in his hand. He looked at the door again. He had a meeting in 40 minutes and a dry cleaner 2 streets over and a full schedule for the coming week, beginning Monday morning when he would officially take up his new position at Harrow & Voss Creative and meet the incoming junior team for the first time. He tucked the napkin into his jacket pocket. He went to get another coffee. The onboarding packet was in her bag. This was objectively the only thing going right. Maeve had found it at 7:43 a.m. under Gerald the Succulent, who had at some point migrated from the counter to the packet itself in what she could only interpret as a personal statement. She'd shaken the soil off the corner, checked that the pages were still legible, and made a decision that this was fine. Professionals showed up with slightly soil-dusted onboarding packets all the time. Probably. She had rehearsed the morning. She had rehearsed it carefully. She would arrive 8 minutes early, which was not on time but was early, and she would find the meeting room before it filled up, and she would sit somewhere competent-looking, middle of the table, not the back, not the front, and she would make 1 or 2 measured, intelligent contributions that established her as someone who was worth having in the room without coming across as the person who was trying too hard to prove that. She arrived 4 minutes late because the tube had opinions. The building was glass and concrete, and the kind of quietly expensive that didn't need to announce itself. The lobby had a reception desk, staffed by a woman who looked like she had never in her life misplaced anything, and who directed Maeve to the 4th floor with the efficient warmth of someone who had directed a great many slightly frantic people to the 4th floor, and was at peace with this being her purpose. The lift was out of service. Maeve took the stairs. She found the meeting room at the end of a long corridor, identified it by the low murmur of voices beyond the glass panel in the door, adjusted her bag, smoothed her jacket, took 1 breath, and pushed it open. 14 people looked up. She had prepared for 14 people looking up. That was fine. She did the thing where she smiled and mouthed sorry and slid into the nearest open chair, which happened to be at the far end of the table from the door, which meant she had to walk the full length of the room while everyone continued to look at her. She did this. She sat down. She placed the onboarding packet on the table in front of her with what she felt was quiet confidence. Then she looked up. There was a man at the head of the table. He was standing with 1 hand resting on the back of the chair, not sitting yet, as though he'd paused mid-motion when the door opened. He was wearing a dark jacket, charcoal shirt, no tie. His posture was the posture of someone who had never once in their life fidgeted. Maeve's gaze moved to the jacket. Something shifted at the edge of her attention. Not an alarm exactly. More like the feeling of a word on the tip of your tongue. The sense of something unresolved. She looked at his hands, the way he was standing. Then he spoke. Now that we're all here. That voice. Low, unhurried. The voice of a man who had at some point decided that urgency was optional. Maeve's gaze snapped to his face. The world did a small, terrible rotation. It was the shirt first. No, not the shirt. He'd changed the shirt, obviously. But it was the collar, the particular way he wore his collar, and then it was the jaw and the posture, and then it was his eyes, which were already on her, which had been on her, which had possibly been on her since she walked in the door. And they were the same eyes that had looked at her over the ruins of a 450 oat milk latte on Saturday morning, with an expression of absolute, unruffled neutrality. The color left her face. Then it came back all at once in the wrong direction. He watched this happen. She could see him watching it. The full sequence, the recognition, the processing, the understanding of what the understanding meant, moved across her face in real time like weather across an open field, and he stood at the head of the table and observed it with the focused patience of a man watching a very specific experiment reach its conclusion. He did not smile. He did not acknowledge it. He simply continued. I'll keep the introductions brief. My name is Elliot Voss. As of this morning, I'm taking over as CEO of Harrow & Voss Creative. Some of you know the work I've done at Meridian and before that at Callaway Group. For those who don't, you will. Maeve stared at the surface of the table. Voss. The name had been in the onboarding packet. She had read the onboarding packet. She had read it twice on Sunday evening and retained the broad strokes. New leadership structure, transition period, collaborative approach, blah, blah, blah. But she had not, apparently, retained the name in any way that connected it to a human being who currently had her phone number folded in his jacket pocket. She became aware that the man to her left was leaning slightly toward her. You okay? He whispered. His name was probably something normal. She would find out later. She gave him a microscopic nod. Around the table, people were introducing themselves. It was moving clockwise. She was going to have to speak. She was going to have to say her name and her role in the same room as a man who had watched her dab at his shirt with a fistful of napkins and call him nobody special, and then narrate her own exit in real time. She looked up once. He was listening to someone else speak. His attention turned to the left side of the table, his expression professionally attentive. Nothing on his face said, I know you. Nothing said you called me a nobody 4 days ago. Nothing said anything at all. Which was somehow worse. The introductions reached her. Maeve Callaway, she said. Her voice came out normal. She was unreasonably proud of this. Junior strategist, brand and content. I transferred from the Bristol office. She paused one beat. Happy to be here. Elliot Voss looked at her. Welcome, he said. One word, completely level, entirely unreadable. She could not tell, she genuinely could not tell, if he remembered her at all. The napkin could have been thrown away, the number could have meant nothing. He met a lot of people. She had been a minor inconvenience on a Saturday morning. It was possible, plausible even, that she had simply not registered, that she had been filed under stranger, forgettable and closed. The meeting moved on. Elliot spoke for another 20 minutes about the quarter's priorities. Clean, precise, no filler, the kind of presentation that made you realize most presentations were mostly air, and Maeve took notes and kept her eyes on her paper and did not look at him more than twice. Both times he wasn't looking at her. One of those times, she was almost certain he had just stopped looking at her. After, people filtered out in the slow shuffle of post-meeting energy, collecting cups and bags, and the low murmur of first-day small talk. Maeve gathered her packet and stood and made a completely normal decision to exit via the door at the far end of the room that happened to be closer to where she was sitting, which also happened to take her past the head of the table. She was almost past it when his voice came, low, addressed to the room in general as he collected his own folder. The Bristol team's Q3 brand case, I read it on the flight over. Solid strategic instinct. She stopped walking. She turned around. He was already looking at her, not at the room, at her. With the same expression he'd had on Saturday, that absolute neutral attention that gave nothing away and somehow communicated everything. That was your work, he said, not a question. Her mouth opened, most of it. He nodded once, the nod of a man filing a fact, and looked back down at his folder. Get the coffee order right tomorrow, he said. There's a brief at 9. He walked out. Maeve stood at the head of the now empty meeting table and stared at the door he'd just walked through. Get the coffee order right. She picked up her onboarding packet. She looked at the door, she looked at the packet. She considered seriously and in good faith whether she was being hazed. Then she picked up her pen, clicked it twice and went to find her desk. By Wednesday, Maeve had a system. This was notable because Maeve did not historically do systems. She did improvisation and good intentions and the occasional inspired pivot. Systems were for people who trusted themselves to maintain them, and she had a complicated relationship with that particular form of optimism. But the coffee order was a system, and the coffee order worked and she was going to defend it. It had started Tuesday morning. She'd arrived 22 minutes before the 9 o'clock brief, found the coffee situation in the small kitchen off the main floor, and spent 4 minutes interviewing the office manager with the focused energy of someone diffusing something. By 8:52 she had placed a flat white, no sugar, full milk, 1 degree below scalding, which was apparently a temperature preference that people had, on the corner of Elliot Voss's desk, knocked twice, and left before he looked up from his screen. She had not waited to see if it was right. She had found out at 9:03 when the brief started, and he walked in holding it, still drinking it, and said nothing about it whatsoever, which she had decided to interpret as correct. Thursday she did the same. Friday she did the same. It became, without discussion or acknowledgement of any kind, the thing that happened. She brought the coffee. He did not thank her. She did not require thanks. There was something clarifying about that. An exchange that existed outside the normal grammar of the office, conducted entirely in the language of this, is simply what occurs. She told herself it was professional courtesy. She did not examine this claim too closely. The brief on Wednesday was a brand repositioning project, a mid-sized client, retail sector, identity refresh before a spring campaign. Elliot had laid out the parameters in 12 minutes flat, distributed the background materials, and opened the floor. What followed was 40 minutes of the most expensive circular conversation Maeve had witnessed since her second year of university. The problem, as she understood it after the first 10 minutes, was that the room had divided itself into two factions: the people who wanted to lean into the client's heritage angle and the people who wanted to drop it entirely for something contemporary. And both factions were making arguments that were structurally fine and practically useless because they were solving for the wrong variable. The issue wasn't the heritage. The issue was that the heritage, as currently framed, skewed 45 plus in a way that made it invisible to exactly the demographic the client needed to reach. You didn't have to choose, you had to translate. She sat with this for a while. Around her, the conversation continued its orbit. She wrote something in the margin of her brief, looked at it, wrote something else beneath it. The gap isn't the heritage itself, she said. The room shifted. She hadn't raised her hand or cleared her throat or prefaced it in any way. It had come out at the natural break in someone else's sentence, measured but not loud, the way you'd say something you'd been sitting with long enough to be sure of. The visual language around it is doing the wrong work. The client's archive material, the mid-century stuff especially, it reads as nostalgia to the 45-plus bracket, but it reads as aesthetic to the under 35 bracket. That's not a contradiction, that's an asset. You run two executions off the same source material. Heritage isn't the problem, translation is. A pause. Someone said, that's actually... Someone else said, the archive material is already cleared for use. And then the room was moving in a different direction, and people were pulling up references on laptops, and the conversation had reorganized itself around a new center of gravity without anyone formally acknowledging the shift. Maeve looked back down at her brief. At the head of the table, Elliot had not moved. He was looking at her notes, or at the general space of her notes, with an expression she was beginning to recognize. Not the neutral mask, but something just underneath it. The version of his face that appeared when something had registered, and he had not yet decided what to do with it. He did not say anything to her directly. He didn't need to. When the meeting wrapped, he stood, collected his folder, and said to the room, "The translation framework. Run a deck on that by Friday. Calloway, you're leading." He walked out. The man to her left, his name was Dom, she had learned. Dom from accounts, reliably kind and perpetually caffeinated, turned to her with his eyebrows in his hairline. "Did you just get handed a lead in your first week?" Maeve looked at the door. "I think so," she said. "That doesn't happen. I'm choosing not to examine it." Friday evening, 6:15. Most of the floor had emptied in the way floors emptied at the end of the week, gradually at first, then all at once like a tide going out. Maeve was still at her desk because the deck was mostly done, and mostly done was not done, and she was constitutionally unable to leave a thing at mostly. The office, without its population, became a different kind of place. Quieter than quiet, the specific silence of a space that was built for noise and had run out of it for the day. The overhead lights had dimmed on their sensors. The city outside the windows was shifting from grey afternoon into the amber and blue of early evening, and Maeve had stopped working for approximately 90 seconds to look at it. This was the part of the day she never told people about, the still part. The part that happened after the forward motion stopped and before she remembered she was supposed to be doing something else. She had her elbows on the desk and her chin in her hands, and she was looking at the skyline, not thinking about it, just looking, the way you looked at water, when she became aware of footsteps. She did not move. She didn't know why exactly. Maybe because moving would have broken whatever this small moment was, and she was comfortable in it, and she had a mild but stubborn resistance to breaking comfortable things. The footsteps slowed. She knew without looking who it was. There was something about the pace of them, unhurried, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who did not shuffle or rush, that she had already learned in a week, the same way you learned the sound of a particular door or the rhythm of a particular train. Elliot stopped somewhere to her left, not close, just within the same quiet. She didn't turn around. He didn't speak. For a moment, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15, they both just looked at the window. The city doing its evening thing, the light changing in that way it only changed on clear winter days, going golden and then going cold. Then Maeve said, because she was Maeve and silence was only comfortable up to a point, "It's a good window." A pause. "It is," he said. That was all. No follow-up, no qualification, just the agreement, landing quietly, and then the sound of him continuing down the corridor toward his office. She heard his door close. She looked back at her screen. It is. 2 words, and yet she was going to be thinking about the way he'd said them for, she checked her estimation, significantly longer than was reasonable. The particular quality of it. Not polite, not performative, just true. The way you said something when you meant it, and had no interest in decorating the fact. She saved the deck, closed her laptop, gathered her bag. She was almost at the lift when she remembered she'd left her pen on the desk. She always left her pen on the desk. This was its own kind of system, and she went back for it, and on the way past she noticed that the light in Elliot's office was still on. She did not stop. She did not knock. She walked past it the way she'd walked past things all her life, aware of them, carrying them quietly and saying nothing at all. On Monday morning, the coffee was on his desk at 8:49. He had arrived at 8:30, which was earlier than usual, and not because of any particular reason he was prepared to name. He had opened his laptop, reviewed the weekend briefs, and then looked at the corner of his desk. He already knew it would be there. That was the thing he was beginning to find inconvenient. He picked it up. The temperature was exactly right. It was always exactly right, which meant she was paying attention to something he had never asked her to pay attention to, and she was doing it without comment or expectation of acknowledgement, which meant she was not doing it to be noticed. Elliot Voss was, professionally and personally, a man who noticed everything. He had not planned to notice this. He drank the coffee. He opened the translation deck she'd sent at 6:22 on Friday evening. Clean, well-structured, the kind of work that looked effortless because it had been done carefully, and he read it from the beginning, even though he'd already read it on Saturday. He did not examine why he was reading it again. He filed it somewhere without a label, the same way he'd filed the napkin, the same way he was beginning to file everything about her. It happened on a Thursday in his office, over a document she should have emailed. In her defense, and she was prepared to offer one if asked, the revision notes were extensive and margin-dependent, and the kind of thing that genuinely made more sense in person, where she could point at the specific paragraph that had 3 layers of contradictory feedback on it, and say you see the problem without it becoming a 40-message email chain that resolved nothing. She had a reasonable case for the in-person delivery. She had rehearsed it in the corridor. She knocked twice. His voice said yes in the way it said most things, low, unhurried, the single syllable doing exactly the work required of it and no more. She pushed the door open. His office was, she had decided, the most honest room in the building, not decorated so much as configured, everything placed with the same deliberate economy he brought to sentences. No excess, no performance. A single architectural print on the wall that she suspected he'd chosen, because it was technically interesting rather than because someone told him offices were supposed to have things on the walls. His desk was clear in a way that wasn't absence but selection, only what was active, only what was necessary. It looked like the inside of how he thought. She found this privately extremely appealing, and she was not going to be investigating that response at this time. The revision notes on the Harrow brief, she said, and crossed to the desk and put the document down in front of him, open to the page in question. She leaned over slightly to point at the section. This paragraph has got 3 sets of comments on it that are technically all requesting different things. Fielding from accounts wants the data up front. Soren in Creative wants the data after the narrative hook so it doesn't front-load the read. You've marked it restructure with no direction, which could mean either, and I'm not going to guess. He looked at the paragraph. Then he looked at her note in the margin. She'd written which one, in small clear letters with a small clear arrow, and something crossed his face that might have been the faintest version of appreciation. Neither, he said. Remove it entirely, it's hedging. If the argument is sound, the data is in the appendix where it belongs. You don't lead with armor. She looked at the paragraph, read it again. You're right, she said. I knew something was wrong with it. I thought it was the placement. It's the instinct underneath the placement. He picked up his pen and drew a single clean line through the whole section. When you hedge in the document, it reads as uncertainty in the room. Take the armor off. Make the case. Maeve looked at the line through the paragraph and felt something click in a way that was going to change how she wrote for a long time. She straightened up, made a note, started to turn. Leave the data structure on the secondary page, though, she said. Fielding will feel it if there's nothing to point to in the meeting. He thinks in columns. Elliot looked up at her. It was a slightly different look from the ones she'd catalogued so far. Not the neutral attention, not the filing look, something that had, briefly, almost imperceptibly, an edge of surprise in it. The look of a man who had made a calculation and received an answer he hadn't entered. Yes, he said, and do that. She nodded and gathered the document and was almost at the door when he spoke again. Not in the voice he used for work. The same voice, technically, same register, same pace, but something in it had shifted by roughly the weight of one unguarded thought. You'll want to send this before the 5 o'clock. I will. She had her hand on the doorframe. I'll have it to you by 4. A pause. The particular kind of pause she had learned to identify as Elliot Voss deciding whether to continue. The reading speed, he said. How people think in rooms, whether they need columns or narrative, you watch for that. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't just an observation either. It was something halfway between the two, the kind of thing you said when you wanted to name something without quite committing to the naming of it. I've always done that, she said. My mum used to say I read rooms better than I read the road. She paused. Which, fair point, the road thing. That's well documented. The ghost of something moved across his face. Not quite the almost smile from Saturday, adjacent to it. Then he said very quietly, as though it had arrived without being sent, I used to build the system so I wouldn't have to. She turned back. He was looking at the desk, not at the document, past it at some middle distance that existed somewhere between the desk's surface and whatever thought had just surfaced. His pen was still in his hand. He was not moving it. Maeve stood in the doorway. She understood, in the way she sometimes understood things before she could have explained how, that this was something real, not a prepared thing, not a managed thing. Just a sentence that had come out of a place he didn't usually allow access to, the place underneath the configurations and the deliberate economies and the office that looked like the inside of how he thought. I used to build the system so I wouldn't have to. Read the room, watch for what people needed, manage the variables before they became surprises, build it so tight, so clean, so well-engineered that nothing could arrive unannounced. She saw it clearly, the whole shape of it in 11 words. She did not say so. She did not ask what he meant, or when it had started, or whether it had worked. She did not tilt her head and offer the warm, careful "you can tell me more" that people offered when they sensed a door open and wanted to push through it. 4 o'clock, she said. He looked up. I'll have it to you by 4, she said. The same words she'd already said, grounding the moment back in the ground level, the practical, the thing that was simply true and required nothing of either of them, not dismissing it, not pressing it, just leaving it where it had landed, intact, untouched. She left. The door closed behind her. Elliot Voss sat at his desk and did not move for approximately 30 seconds. In 11 years of building the systems, tightening the controls, narrowing the variables, constructing a professional life and then a personal life and then a general orientation toward the world that was predicated entirely on the idea that structure was protection, he had never once said that out loud, not to his brother who had his own version of it, not to the therapist he'd seen for 4 months 3 years ago, and then stopped seeing because the sessions were useful in a way he didn't know what to do with. Not to anyone. It had just come out. And she had heard it. He had seen her hear it. Had seen the understanding land clear and immediate in the way things landed with her before she decided to have a reaction to them. And then she had let it be. No follow-up, no careful question. Know what do you mean by that, or I hear you, or the gentle therapeutic lean that turned a private thing into a shared project. She had heard it, held it for a moment that was exactly the right length, and then walked it back to the 4 o'clock like it was sacred and ordinary at the same time. He had been prepared, had had the preparation ready without knowing it, the deflection already loaded, for someone who needed more. She hadn't needed more. He put his pen down. He looked at the window, the one she'd called a good window on Friday evening when she thought no one could see her in the quiet. He had stood in the corridor for an unreasonable number of seconds before saying anything that night, and he had not examined why, and he was not going to examine it now. He pulled up the brief on his screen. He read the hedging paragraph one more time. When you hedge, it reads as uncertainty. Take the armor off, make the case. He had said that to her about a document. He stared at his screen. He clicked delete. At 3:58, the revised brief landed in his inbox. She'd removed the paragraph. She'd kept the data structure on the secondary page. She'd added one line at the end of the executive summary, clean, direct, no armor, that reframed the entire central argument in a way that made the version before it look like a first draft. He read it twice. He did not reply. He did not need to. She would know. That was the thing he could not file, the thing that didn't fit in the system. She always knew. The Alcott presentation was supposed to be straightforward. This was, in retrospect, the first sign. Alcott and Partners was the agency's largest retained client. 3 years, significant billings, the kind of relationship that had its own internal mythology about how it had been won and what it meant to keep it. The spring campaign was the first major deliverable under Elliott's leadership, which meant it was also implicitly the first test of whether the new structure held under pressure. Maeve had spent 2 weeks on the deck, not 2 weeks exclusively. She had other projects, other briefs, the ongoing cognitive background radiation of the coffee logistics, but 2 weeks of it living in the back of her head in the particular way that good problems lived there, surfacing in the shower, resolving themselves on the tube, waking her up at 6:15 with a thought about slide 9 that turned out to be correct. The deck was good. She knew it was good. Dom had read it and said this is genuinely good in a tone that suggested he didn't say that often. Elliott had reviewed it on Wednesday and sent back 4 comments, 2 of which were small structural adjustments, and 2 of which were, she had read them several times to be sure, not corrections but refinements, the kind of notes that took what was already working and sharpened it, the kind of notes you gave when you respected what you were working with. Thursday, 2:30. The Alcott team filed into the large meeting room on the 4th floor, their creative director, their head of marketing, their brand manager, and a man introduced as Giles Alcott Jr., son of the founder, who had apparently recently joined the senior team and who sat at the corner of the table with the relaxed confidence of someone who had never needed to earn a room. Elliott sat to Maeve's left. She had the deck open on her laptop. She had the printed leave-behinds. She had the data appendix Fielding had requested in columns because she had learned. She was ready. She was ready until slide 7, when Giles Alcott Jr. leaned back in his chair, looked at the translation framework and said, "This feels quite junior." A pause. Not the content, apparently, the feel of it. The creative director, a woman named Priya who had been nodding along for 6 slides, glanced sideways at him. The head of marketing looked at his printed copy. Maeve kept her expression level. "Could you be specific about what's not landing?" she said. Not defensive, calibrated, the voice she used when she needed a real answer before she could give a useful one. Giles made a vague gesture at the slide. "It's a bit on the nose, isn't it? Heritage here, contemporary there. The split feels like, I don't know, something you'd present at a mid-level agency." 3 things happened simultaneously. Maeve opened her mouth. Elliott said, "Walk us through your brief." It was quiet enough to be a question, and delivered with enough weight to be something else entirely. The room adjusted. Giles looked at him. "The brief?" "The brief you gave us 8 weeks ago." Elliott had his copy open. He had always had his copy open, she realized. From the beginning, before the first slide, he'd had the original brief on the table beside his water glass. Page 3. Primary objective: brand repositioning to extend reach into the under 35 bracket without alienating existing customer base. The translation framework addresses that objective directly. If the framework is wrong, the brief is wrong. Which would you like to revisit? A silence. A different kind of silence from the one before. This one had texture. Priya looked at her copy. The head of marketing did something on his phone. Giles sat with his vague gesture still half extended in the air, recalibrating. "I'm not saying the brief is wrong," he said more carefully now. "Then the framework is right," Elliot said. Not aggressively, factually, the tone of a man closing a bracket. "Calloway, slide 9. Maeve went to slide 9. The presentation continued. It was fine after that. Better than fine, actually. The kind of meeting that recovered its footing and found a better stride for the stumble. Priya had strong opinions about the visual executions. The head of marketing wanted adjusted timelines, and by 4:15 they had a revised scope and a handshake on Phase 2, and Giles Alcott Jr. had said approximately 7 more words, most of them logistical. The Alcott team left. The room emptied in the usual way, people gathering papers, the low exhale of post-meeting decompression. Dom caught Maeve's eye from the doorway and did a small private nod that meant that was fine, you were fine, and she returned it. Elliot was at the window with his back to the room looking at his phone. The last person out pulled the door to, not quite closed, and then it was just the two of them in the large meeting room with the afternoon light going pale through the glass and the city doing its Thursday thing outside. Maeve gathered the leave-behinds, stacked them, straightened the stack against the table. "Thank you," she said, "for the brief thing. That was a good move." "It was accurate," he said. He was still at the window. "It was also useful to me. I'm aware." She picked up her laptop. She should go. There was a revised scope to work into a timeline and an email to send, and 3 other things she had written on a post-it that morning, and she should go. She did not go. "Can I ask you something?" He turned from the window. "Did you know he was going to do that?" she said. The junior comment. Their pause, not the processing pause, shorter than that. The pause of a man deciding how much of a true answer to give. "I knew someone in that room was going to test you," he said. She looked at him. "Why me specifically?" It wasn't inflected as a question. He seemed to hear that. "Because you're new and the work is good, and those 2 things together make certain people uncomfortable." He said it the way he said most things, flat, undecorated, as though the truth was a logistical fact rather than a thing with edges. "I've been watching it build for 2 weeks. Maeve was quiet for a moment. "And you were just going to watch?" "I was going to let you handle it," a beat. "You were handling it. And then you stepped in anyway." Something moved in his face. Not defensiveness, something more complicated than that. "He changed the framing," Elliot said. "He wasn't questioning the work anymore, he was questioning you." The last word landed differently from the rest of the sentence, slightly more weight to it. Not performed weight, the weight of something that had actually shifted the calculation. That's a different question. The room was very quiet. Maeve stood on one side of the meeting table, and he stood on the other side with the window behind him. And she was aware with a clarity that felt almost inconvenient that they had arrived somewhere neither of them had navigated toward on purpose. She had been questioned and he had not liked it. Not the work, her. She knew what that meant. She was not someone who misread things. That was not in her catalogue of flaws. She read rooms and she read people, and she was reading this one with complete, uncomfortable accuracy. Elliot. It was the first time she'd used his name. Not Voss, not the careful professional address. Just his name, the way you used someone's name when the sentence that followed it needed to be received and not just heard. He looked at her. She did not know what she had been planning to say. Something honest. Something in the register of "I think I know what's happening here," or "this is getting complicated," or just the simple declaration of the thing that had been building for weeks in coffee cups and margin notes and window silences. What came out instead was, "The deck was good." A beat. "It was," he said. "I just needed you to know I know that. That I didn't need. I wasn't waiting for someone to—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. The sentence was going somewhere she hadn't planned, and she could feel its direction, and she could not, in this moment, decide whether to follow it or not. "I know," he said. 2 words. The same weight as it is on a Friday evening, but heavier. More arrived at. The voice of a man who was saying "I know" and meaning several true things at once, and not packaging any of them. She looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly longer than anything she could explain. Then she picked up her laptop and her leave-behinds, and the revised scope, and she moved to the door. She stopped in the frame, didn't turn. "For what it's worth," she said, and her voice was level, almost light, the tone she used when she was carrying something carefully. The brief thing was a good move, whether it was accurate or not. She left. The door stayed open behind her. Elliot stood in the empty meeting room. The city went on outside the window. The afternoon light was going. He was standing where he'd been standing, and his phone was in his hand, and the meeting had ended, and there was a revised scope to review, and a call at 5:30 and a full schedule tomorrow, and the whole machinery of a day continued to operate exactly as it was supposed to. He had told her he'd been watching it build for 2 weeks. He had not planned to say that. He had not planned any of it. Not the weight he'd given to her, not the particular quality of the 2 seconds before he'd cut Giles off, not the way something in him had moved, fast and without consultation, the moment the target shifted from the work to the woman who had done it. He looked at the door she'd left open. He had a system. He had built a very good system. He stood in the empty room and was aware, with the precision he brought to all things, that the system had a problem. The problem had brown eyes and left coffee on his desk at 8:49, and had called him nobody special on a Saturday morning, and he had kept the napkin. He had kept the napkin. He put his phone in his pocket, straightened his jacket, and walked out. He did not look at her desk as he passed it. He was very deliberate about not looking at her desk as he passed it. She was not supposed to be on that street. She was supposed to be on the tube, on the central line heading home via the route she always took, which did not pass through the small grid of streets behind the Barbican where the good wine shop was, and where, apparently, Elliot Voss bought coffee on Friday evenings. But the central line had opinions. It always had opinions. And she'd come up at the wrong exit, and rather than go back down and navigate correctly, she had made the executive decision to walk the long way, which had taken her down a street she didn't know, past a bookshop she was going to have to come back to, and then around a corner into the tail end of a Friday evening that smelled like cold air and someone's nearby dinner and the particular exhaust and rain smell of London, deciding to be atmospheric. She saw him before he saw her. He was outside the coffee shop, not a chain, the small independent one with the handwritten board, holding a paper bag and looking at his phone with the focused attention he gave everything, and he was wearing a coat she hadn't seen before, dark wool, collar turned up against the cold, and he looked. She took this in with the helpless accuracy she brought to all observations, like himself, completely, uncomplicatedly himself. Not the CEO, not the man at the head of the table, just a person on a street on a Friday evening who had gone to get coffee and was now checking his phone. She almost turned around. She had time. He hadn't looked up yet. She could reverse course, find the correct tube exit, go home and spend the weekend not thinking about the meeting room, and that's a different question, and the 17,000 ways she'd replayed the walk to the door. She kept walking. He looked up when she was 6 feet away, with the spatial awareness of someone who processed his environment continuously and didn't need to look up to know someone was approaching. He just registered her, the way he always registered her, that full, immediate attention. "Wrong tube exit," she said before he could say anything. "The Barbican one. The Barbican one." She stopped at a natural conversational distance, not close, not far, the distance of 2 people who knew each other and hadn't yet decided what that meant on a Friday evening outside their mutual context. Are you getting coffee to take home?" "Beans," he said. He indicated the paper bag. "They only have them Fridays." "That's very committed. It's good coffee." "I know," she said. "I've been making it for you for 3 weeks." Something happened in his face. Not the almost smile, the actual precondition of it, closer this time, the real version arriving at the surface before he could redirect it. He looked down at the paper bag. "You have," he said. A pause. The city went on around them. A cyclist, a couple, a man with a very small dog that stopped to examine Maeve's shoes with extreme personal interest. She looked down at it. It looked up at her. She had a brief non-verbal exchange with it that ended with it apparently satisfied and moving on. When she looked up, Elliot was watching her. Not the professional attention, something stiller than that. Something that had been in the meeting room and in the corridor on Friday evenings, and in the 11-word sentence about systems and armor, and the things you built so you didn't have to feel the shape of the room. "Maeve," he said. She had heard her name in his voice once, in the meeting room when he'd said it to the space after she'd left, which she hadn't heard, so technically she hadn't heard it. This was the first time. Direct, addressed to her, her name in his mouth like he'd been holding it for a while, and had decided on a Friday evening outside a coffee shop behind the Barbican that he was done holding it. "Yes," she said. "Not what, not yeah, just yes, receiving it." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. She watched him. He produced, folded once, slightly worn at the crease in the way of something that had been folded and unfolded and refolded over several weeks. A napkin. Not a clean napkin. Not a fresh one. The napkin. The slightly coffee-stained oat milk latte adjacent, number written in pen napkin from Café Grind on a Saturday morning 3 weeks ago, when she had called him nobody special and handed it to him like a receipt for a disaster. He held it for a moment. She stared at it. "Oh, you kept it," she said. The words came out with no preparation, no filtration, the way all her true things came out. "I kept it," he said. Simple. Final. The tone of a man confirming a fact he had been aware of for some time and was only now prepared to say out loud. She looked at the napkin. She looked at him. There were things she could say. There were several of them, a small crowd of them, pressing at the door of her mouth in the way things always pressed. The joke, the deflection, the warm, rambling sentence that filled the space before anything could feel too heavy. She could say, "That's a bit strange, Voss." She could say, "I can't believe you kept the napkin. Who keeps a napkin?" She could say, "You know, I only gave you that because I panicked and also dropped my wallet." She said none of them. She reached out and took it from him. Not to read the number. She knew the number. It was hers. But just to hold the thing that he had kept. To be someone who was allowed to hold it. She looked down at her handwriting, slightly smudged, the 7 in her phone number with the continental cross through it, that she'd picked up somewhere in her second year of university and never put down. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he said. She looked up at him. He was close. Not close in the way that required accounting for, close in the way that had happened without either of them moving, the natural gravitational result of two people standing on a narrow pavement having a conversation that was not about coffee or napkins or anything other than what it was actually about. She was aware of the cold in the city, and the man with the very small dog somewhere behind her, and the bookshop she was going to have to come back to, and the central line with its opinions, and all the ordinary texture of a Friday evening in London that was continuing to occur around them, entirely indifferent to the fact that something was happening in the middle of it. He lifted his hand. Not a dramatic thing, not a reaching or a sweeping or any of the gestures that announced themselves, just his hand moving with the same deliberate economy he brought to everything, and finding the side of her face and staying there, his thumb at her cheekbone, his palm against her jaw. A choice made quietly the way he made all the choices that mattered. She went still. Not her normal still, not the Friday window still, which was restful. This was the still of someone whose entire nervous system had paused to pay attention to one thing. She forgot the city. She forgot the dog. She forgot the napkin, still in her hand, which she was probably creasing. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since a Saturday morning when she'd walked into him at speed, and told him he was nobody, and he had let her walk away and kept the evidence. Then he kissed her. It was not a declaration. It was not a gesture. It was a fact. Simple, unhurried, the kind of kiss that had been decided before it happened, and knew it, and didn't need to make a case for itself. His hand stayed where it was. The paper bag made a quiet sound. The city went on. She kissed him back. This was also a fact. She was not passive in it. She was Maeve. She was never passive in anything. And her free hand found the lapel of his coat, and she leaned into it the way she leaned into all things she'd decided she wanted. Completely. Without the half measure, without the hedge. Take the armor off, make the case. When they stopped, it was gradual. Not an ending so much as a pause. He stayed close. His hand came down slowly, tracking along her jaw, her chin, releasing with the same deliberateness with which it had arrived. She looked up at him. He looked like himself. Still precise, the collar of his coat turned against the cold, but the mask, the system, the configuration was not there. He was just looking at her with his actual face. "You should have texted," she said. His expression shifted. "I had your number. You had my number for 3 weeks." "I know." She looked at him for a moment. She looked at the napkin in her hand. She looked at the coffee shop, the street, the Friday evening arranged around them like it had been waiting. "Was the coffee always right?" she asked. He looked at her. "From the first day," he said. She nodded slowly, pressed her lips together. looked down at the napkin one more time, and then carefully, with the precise economy of someone who had learned something from watching a particular person for 3 weeks, folded it back along its existing crease. She tucked it into her own coat pocket. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to find a different tube exit." "The Silk Street one," he said, "left at the end of the block." "I know where Silk Street is." "Do you?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I'll find it," she said. She started walking. She had made it 4 steps when she stopped, eyes on the pavement in front of her, and said to the middle distance, "You are extremely inconvenient, Elliot Voss." Behind her, for the first time, fully and without redirection, she heard him laugh. It was a small sound, brief, real. She kept walking. She was smiling so hard her face hurt. Monday arrived the way Mondays always arrived, without apology. The tube had opinions. She was going to be 4 minutes late. Gerald the succulent had knocked over her pen, not the pen, her good pen, the one she'd had since Bristol, and it had rolled under the radiator, and she'd retrieved it, but at cost. And now there was a small amount of radiator-related dust on her left cuff that she had decided was invisible from a professional distance. Everything was normal. Everything was completely, precisely, structurally normal. She stopped at the coffee shop on the corner of the street. Not Café Grind, the other one, the small one. The one she'd found in her first week because it was 4 minutes from the office and did the flat white correctly. And she ordered the usual. Hers with an extra shot because it was Monday and the tube had tried her. His at 1 degree below scalding full milk, no sugar, because that was the system. The barista made them in the order she'd learned to ask for. His first. She walked to the office. The building was the same building. Glass and concrete, quietly expensive lobby staffed by the woman who had never in her life misplaced anything. The lift was working today. She took it to the 4th floor and walked down the corridor and past Dom's empty desk and the meeting room from Thursday, and the window at the end of the hall that caught the morning light for approximately 40 minutes before the angle shifted. The floor was early morning quiet. 3 people at desks, headphones on. Someone from accounts getting water in the kitchen. The low, comfortable hum of a Monday that had not yet become a Monday. His office light was on. It was always on. She walked toward it the way she always walked toward it. Direct, no ceremony, the knock and the leave that was their established grammar. And she knocked twice and pushed the door open. He was at his desk, laptop open, a brief in his hand, coffeeless because it was 8:47, and the coffee had not yet arrived, and it never arrived until 8:49, and the system worked. He looked up. This was the part that was different. Not the look. The look had always been immediate, fully present, the attention arriving before she'd finished entering the room. That part was the same. But the quality of it was different in the way that only she could read, because she had spent 3 weeks learning the frequencies of his face, and the one he was using now was not the professional one. It was not the neutral mask or the filing look, or the almost smile or the real smile she'd heard on Friday evening, and was apparently going to be thinking about for some time. It was just him, looking at her. In the way he'd looked at her outside a coffee shop behind the Barbican, with his hand on her face, which was a thing that had happened on a Friday in the real world, and which was now apparently going to coexist with the Monday morning, and the brief in his hand, and the quietly expensive building, and the whole ordinary machinery of a working week. She crossed to the desk. She put the coffee on the corner, his corner, the established spot, where it had lived every morning for 3 weeks and where it would presumably continue to live, and straightened up. He looked at the coffee. He looked at her. "Right temperature," she said. "I know," he said. There was a pause that lasted approximately 4 seconds, and contained in its 4 seconds a complete and unspoken exchange about everything that had happened since a Saturday morning when she had walked into him at speed and committed oat milk aggravated assault and told him he was nobody special, and handed him a napkin like the world's worst business card. Then his hand moved, not to the coffee, across the desk, brief still in the other hand, unhurried, deliberate, to the corner just near where she was standing, where her hand was, the back of his fingers against the back of hers, not a hold, not a clasp, just contact, the quiet, decided kind, the kind that didn't need a name because it already knew what it was. She looked down at it. She looked at him. "I have a 9 o'clock, he said. "You always have a 9 o'clock. "The fielding brief." "I know, I put it in your calendar." "I know you did." She picked up her coffee. His fingers stayed a moment longer and then withdrew with the same deliberateness with which they'd arrived, and he looked back at his laptop, and she took one step toward the door. She stopped. Not because she'd forgotten anything, not because there was a professional reason. She stopped because something had occurred to her, something small and true and entirely Maeve-shaped, and she had approximately zero ability to leave a small true thing unspoken when it was standing right there. "For what it's worth," she said to the doorframe, in the tone she used when she was about to say something she'd definitely thought about, but was going to deliver as though she hadn't. "I Googled you. After the café. Saturday afternoon." He said nothing. She could feel the quality of his attention from across the room. "You came up immediately," she said. "First result, photo and everything." "A beat." "And?" he said. She turned around. He was watching her with the actual face, the real one, the one that had been underneath the system all along, and the corner of his mouth was doing the thing, the full thing, the version that had been a near smile on a Saturday morning, and was now, on a Monday, something considerably more arrived at. She looked at him. She looked at the office. She looked at the coffee in her hand and the doorframe under her palm and the window that was a good window and the man at the desk who had kept a napkin for 3 weeks and laughed on a Friday evening and put his hand on her face like it was a decision he'd already made before he made it. "For you were very obviously somebody," she said. "I knew immediately, I just wasn't ready to know yet." She left. Behind her, she heard the specific quality of a silence that was smiling. She walked back to her desk, sat down, opened her laptop, and pulled up the 9 o'clock brief. Dom arrived 2 minutes later, coat still on, looking at his phone, and dropped into his chair with the energy of a man whose weekend had been a lot. "How are you so calm on a Monday?" he said. Not really a question. Maeve took a sip of her coffee. "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm just in a really good system." Dom looked at her. She was already typing.
Saturday morning, rain in the air, coffee and chaos everywhere. I walked too fast, didn't see the sign until your silence collided with mine. A white shirt, ruined foam on the floor, a stranger standing by the cafe door. I said the first thing that crossed my mind and left the moment far behind. But something in your quiet eyes stayed somewhere in my memory. You were nobody special, just a stranger in the rain. But somehow the world kept turning till we met again. Monday morning, same room, same view, and suddenly the stranger was the man in charge of the room. Now every small moment feels brand new, and the heart I didn't notice started beating for you. The coffee cups at 8:49, a quiet ritual over time. You never asked, I never said, but every morning something spread between the lines and every brief, between the logic and belief. Something steady, calm and true, like the city breathing through. And every word we didn't say was waiting somewhere in the day. You were nobody special, just a stranger in the rain. But somehow the world kept turning till we met again. Monday morning, same room, same view, and suddenly the stranger was the man in charge of the room. Now every small moment feels brand new, and the heart I didn't notice started beating for you. Maybe fate looks ordinary, maybe love walks by unseen, maybe all it takes is coffee to change what life might mean. You were nobody special, just a stranger in the rain. But somehow the world kept turning till we met again. Now the quiet in your voice feels like home somehow, and the napkin that you kept is a promise now. A crowded city, a simple kiss, and a story that started exactly like this. Nobody special until you were everything.